Jesus, for this opportunity to share. I'm going to start a little further back than what most people do, because I'm going to tell you first off that my great-grandmother was a spiritualist medium and a prostitute. And she raised my grandmother in that situation where my grandmother was abused sexually throughout her childhood. My grandmother ended up getting married 5 times. The 5th one was my grandfather. And she was never brought to Jesus or anything, and she had all those wounds. And she did the same thing basically to my mother when she was a young girl. She took her places and had her do everything but the actual sex act with men. And it seemed that it made my grandmother feel important to do that. And when my mother was 14, my grandmother wrote to a man in Kentucky pretending to be my mother, and that she was in love with him, and the man came up and married my mother, and my mother knew nothing about it. And they sent her to Kentucky, and she was so distraught. The man came back and said, no, this isn't right, and brought her back. But then when she was 16, she went out on a date with my father, very first date, and she had gotten a little rebellious streak in her, and at that point she didn't remember the stuff that was done to her as a small child. But she came home from that date, and she said to my grandmother, that thing that you told me not to do, well, I did it, and that's how I was born. So I always kind of felt like I was born as an act of rebellion. But I was born into a household we had plenty. In some ways I was spoiled, terribly spoiled. Other ways I was always an outcast. Some of the ways I was spoiled was my grandfather bought me an organ, and I learned to play the organ as a small child. I even played Ave Maria in the St. Michael Church when I was like 2nd grade. And the only reason I was at St. Michael's Church was because my mother had cousins in Louisville that they would take her to play with, and those cousins would tell her, you're not Catholic, so you're going to hell. And so my mother decided, she's just had me be like 2 weeks before she turned, or 2 weeks after she turned 17 is when she had me. So she was a very young girl, and we lived with the grandparents in the home. And so she decided that she was going to put me in a Catholic school, and I went through the catechism and did all that stuff. But you know, the funny thing is, I don't remember learning about Jesus back then. Hardly at all. I remember some of the traditions and the sacraments and the things that I was taught. And I remember a nun named Sister Mary Dunstan, who probably, if she wasn't a nun, would have been gay, because she was a very big-boned, mean woman that would smack you with her ruler. But I did go through Catholic school through my junior year in high school, and I will get back to that. But my mother, there were 3 things that happened in my life that turned my heart to stone. And the first one was that my mother started dating a man that my grandparents really disapproved of. And I can see why. He was married and had 5 kids. And they had met, and I guess he got divorced, but my grandparents were so intent on getting my mother away from him that they sent her on a trip to Florida. And this was over the Christmas holiday. And 2 days after the Christmas holiday, my mom called, and they, do you remember how they had phones where you could pick up the phone upstairs and hear the people talk? And I got to be real good at not making that little click sound. So I had picked up the phone, and I was 8 years old, and I heard that my mother had gotten married, and I didn't know about it. She hadn't talked to me about it. And that was one of the first things that kind of turned my heart to stone. I was very rebellious against my stepfather. I didn't go to live with him right away. My grandparents made my mom feel like it wasn't right to take me out of school, and he, take me with them. And so it was about 2 years I stayed with the grandparents. And the first, when I did go to live with them, I was about 10 years old, and I hated him because my grandparents had hated him. And the talk all the time was hate, hate, hate. And I resented him. And he had those 5 kids, and they used to come and spend summers with us. And they would take them and buy them all their school clothes. And it was like, huh, you know? And I was very jealous, and I used to act out. And when I got into my teen years, I was hitchhiking all over Toledo. That's where we lived at the time. I even worked on the McGovern campaign back in the day, and I'd be out at all hours. I would stay out all night. We would have great big fights, my stepfather and I, where, like, I can remember once the fight went up the stairs and he had a big clump of my hair and I was scratching at him. And at 16 years old, they decided to send me back to live with my grandparents. In the spoiled aspect of it, my grandpa had bought me a brand new car and brought it up to Toledo, and it was sitting there, and I didn't have even a driver's license. It was a little Chevy Vega, and like another aspect of being spoiled, like with that organ he had bought me, I had a gold lame suit to wear while I played.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like little Liberace or something. It was crazy.
Yeah.
But that type of thing always made me feel like an outcast, because the few friends in the neighborhood that were my age that I knew, I went to Catholic school. So I was an outcast to them because I didn't go to the school with them. And I was an outcast to the kids in the Catholic school because I wasn't part of a Catholic family. I didn't have a family come to Mass with me. They would bring me and drop me off. And, you know, my grandmother would sit in the car or whatever. And so it was just a strange feeling all the time, like I didn't belong anywhere. Once I got back to my grandparents, and I should say that they loaded all my stuff up in this little car, and my mom drove me because I still didn't have my driver's license, left me at the end of the neighborhood in that car, and my stepfather had followed us.
Wow.
And all I can remember is just crying my eyes out, and my grandparents came out and got me and took me back. But I had a lot of issues after that. And to back up a touch, when I was 12 years old, the second thing that happened that turned my heart to stone was, again, I picked up the phone upstairs at that house in Toledo, and I'd never met my father, but I found out that he had shot himself in Florida, and that's what I heard on the phone that day. And, you know, little girls, even if they don't know their father, they start to fantasize that this father is going to be the knight in shining armor, and I was like trying to figure out how I could meet him and all this and that. So that was the second thing that really turned my heart to stone. And I started to, you know, run with the wild crowd. Before I left Toledo, I told you I was in Catholic school up through junior year when I was 16. And the reason I got kicked out of Catholic school was because I was absent for like 30 days in a row when my parents went to a convention in Europe. And a little nun named Sister Victoria that was like 75 years old, probably 4 foot tall, if that, she was telling me about myself and my absences, and I threw the F-bomb at her, so I got kicked out.
You got kicked out.
I got kicked out, yeah. That was St. Ursula Academy, an all-girls high school in Toledo. After high school, it was no holds barred, running with everybody, doing everything. I did have a good friend that had a car accident, drunk. The girl that was with her, that was also my friend, had a very, very tragic, she was kind of like a vegetable for a long time and had like years of rehab to get back to where she was, and she never quite did. That kind of straightened me up a little bit. I had a job at Gold Circle in Belden Village.
Oh, wow.
my first husband was a pipe fitter, union pipe fitter, and they were, when I got hired, they were just building that store, and all the construction people were still in there. So we caught each other's eye a little bit, and I dated him for a while, and then he had a motorcycle, and he had a motorcycle accident that almost tore his leg off.
Oh boy.
And I knew he still lived at his parents' house, so I got an apartment and I took care of him while he had this bad leg. And then he turned around and started to have affairs with women, and so we broke up. And then he came running back to me at some point, and I don't know why I married him after that, but I always had that like revenge spirit towards what he had done in me. And we got married because I don't think I thought anyone else would ever ask me. And I should have known better, because when we were moving some things out of my grandparents' house one day, there was a mirror leaned against my car, and it fell and broke, and he smacked me across the face, and my grandpa almost came to blows with him. But that should have been a warning sign. But no, I went ahead and I married him. We had 3 beautiful children. My boy Nick was only 22 months old when my twins were born, Shannon and Travis. And so I had 3 in diapers, 3 in car seats. All 3 of them were breastfeeding for a time, and I became like this Susie homemaker. I baked all our bread at home from scratch. I, of course, breastfed the kids. I made all their baby food and put it in little ice cube trays, and I never, I was doing the whole thing, and I enjoyed it, but I had no help from my husband. He was horrible. He was a drunk. He would come home drunk with a chip on his shoulder. If he didn't like the dinner, he would throw the plate against the wall. And I got very rebellious against that, and I started to drink. And I remember one time when we had a big fight at the kitchen table, and I took a bottle of Miller's beer and I broke it on the table like they do in the old westerns. And I never got that beer off that wallpaper, honest to goodness, never did come off. But I didn't live there too many more years, because pretty soon it got to the point where we had so many fights, and it was so bad that I actually went and disappeared for about 3 days. And I went and had an affair with his best friend, because I knew that would hurt him the most. And when I came back from that, I had had a couple suicide attempts where I took pills for attention mostly, but this time I took a gun and put it to my head. And I didn't pull the trigger, but he called, and I was put in the mental hospital at Altman Hospital. And during that time, I told him the truth of what had happened when I had been gone, and he went and got a lawyer and filed for divorce and custody of the kids. And because I was in a mental hospital, they told me, well, you can't get your kids because you're in a mental hospital, and you have to prove for at least a year that you're stable, that you can take care of them. Because I thought about leaving him a lot of times, but he always said, well, I'm a pipe fitter. I work from company to company. You'll never get child support from me. And I knew it would be so hard if I actually just picked up and left with the kids. So I let it get to that point, and it was awful, because once I did get out of the hospital, and I did work very hard to get my act together to get the kids back, the lawyer told me that that wasn't true what they had told me, and I couldn't get my kids back, and it would be a very hard fight, and I probably wouldn't win. Now, I did have the opportunity to have the kids with me, but during this time also, my drinking escalated. I got harder and harder as far as the heart goes, and that, of course, was another thing that made my heart hard, was not having the kids. And I became very selfish. I became a thief. I would steal from anybody I worked for, shoplift everywhere I went. Never got caught. Took pride in that. Any employer that I worked with, I would steal. However, I would figure out a way to steal from them. And I never thought twice about that being wrong. I got into cocaine. My best friend was the wife of a drug dealer that had connections in Florida, and I would get all my cocaine free from her. And he had big like warehouses where he grew pot, and the stuff that he sold, they would have like the leaf of it left, and they would call it shake. And I would get big garbage bags full of that, and that was good. I didn't, my friends, I shared with all my friends. I had so much of that stuff. And at one point, my friends set me up with a grow thing in my basement. I had a townhouse at Colonial Club Apartments over off of, I think it's 39th Street, across from where the Raisin Rack, you go back in on Cleveland Avenue. And the basement, they had me block out the windows, and they put the grow lights in with timers on and the watering things and all that. But there was a big storm one night, and I called because the electric went off, and I called to find out what to do so that it wouldn't be ruined, And the FBI were tapping these people's phone.
No.
So they ended up knocking at my door, and they found like remnants of the plants in the basement. And they said, we want to get these people. Would you work with us to get these people? So it actually got to the point where I met a girl, female detective, and we developed a cover story, and I was going to take her around to all the people I knew so that she could get, evidence on them. During that same time, I had developed a relationship with someone who was a very, very, very much of a player, very deceitful, but I was like obsessed with this person. And I got to the point where he was doing things like my first husband had done, and I got crazy. One night I had, he wanted to go with his one friend, and I remember in my nightgown, I chased them with a scissors, their car, away from the townhouse. And my mother, in this meantime, who I wouldn't talk to because since they kicked me out, she got saved. And she started to try to talk to me about Jesus. And I wouldn't have a thing to do with it. I was still very hard-hearted towards her for, dropping me off at my grandparents when she did, and I wouldn't talk to her. And she basically had a nervous breakdown before she found Jesus and found a church up in Toledo. And when I had been engaged to my first husband, I'm kind of jumping around here, but I had taken him to visit her in Toledo, and she had made an appointment with her pastor to take me and talk to him, hoping that I would, see the light. And I did not see the light, and I cussed this pastor out, and it was not pretty. But over the years since that time, once I got to this point with all the drugs and everything, she prayed for me and prayed for me and prayed for me. Now we're talking a course of about 20 years. She would send me books. She would send me, it was always about Jesus. And I was always like, and till towards the end of this time period, I got a set of books from her by Frank Peretti, Piercing the Darkness in This Present Darkness.
Oh, yeah.
And I read them.
Oh.
And I realized that I was not on the right side because it shows the whole spiritual battle that goes on behind the scenes that we don't know about. And things in that book touched me to the point where I started to turn a little bit and soften a little bit. And then at one point when I was driving home from work, there was a big rainstorm, and I pulled over, and the song by Styx, Show Me the Way, Take Me Up to the Mountain, all that, and I started to cry. And from that point on, I felt like a little kid that got held up by the ankles and all the stuff in their pockets was dropping out, because I lost my job, I lost my apartment, I lost the boyfriend, and I had nothing. And I ended up at Glen Bay Hospital over in Maslin that used to be there. And I was in there for treatment for 30 days. And I started to hear about the higher power thing, and, you know, I already was starting to soften up. And then after I got out of there, I went to AA. And they're all about, you know, surrendering. And I started to feel that, as well as all these other things started to line up. And then one day a girl from AA invited me to a little church in Maslin. And she said, there's a special preacher going to be there. He's called the pastor of Bourbon Street. He's from New Orleans.
Oh, wow.
And he was a real preacher, let me tell you. And that morning I went up and I got saved. And I went back to that church that night, not knowing that same guy wasn't going to be there, but I liked the pastor anyway. And I started to go to that church. And in the meantime, in AA, I had gotten pregnant. I had gone by the rules. I waited a whole year of sobriety before I had a relationship. But boy, did I pick a loser. This guy was like the old James Dean in the motorcycle jacket with the hair and all depressed, and, you know. And I got pregnant, and the day I got pregnant, he went into a mental hospital because he was schizophrenic. So I was working at the Quest Deliverance House, which was a treatment center for girls, while, you know, I was in recovery and I was pregnant, and I started to go to the church. And I knew even my kids, my older kids who, you know, I would see all the time still, I knew that I couldn't have an abortion. My oldest son said, well, Mom, why don't you have an abortion? And I knew I couldn't do that. But the kicker is, during my dark times, I had 5 abortions, and it didn't faze me one bit. I have no idea who the fathers were. That's how hard my heart was at that time. But once I was saved, there's no way I could do that. There's no way I could steal. There's no way I could do any of the things that I had been doing. And I stayed in that church and developed friendships. And one of the friendships that I developed was a lady who, her and her husband, they were like greeters outside the church. And once my child was born, I would come in, and her husband was like there, and he'd fuss over the baby like men do, you know. And this lady's name was Martha Seabolt. And she had a son who was in college at the time, and that didn't work out for him, and he came back and he fixed my car. I was driving a I don't know what year it was, but it was a beige, ugly as sin Chevy Citation with 250,000 miles on it.
Wow.
And he came and helped, and his dad too, came and helped fix my car a couple times during that time. But he also, Patrick, the son, came and helped with my kids, like to take them to go-kart tracks and do different things like that. And so we started to develop a really strong friendship. And one thing I saw in him was that he was very, very pure and loyal and truthful. And that's a quality that I valued so highly, because the people that I had been involved with all those years were not that way at all. And it's funny because one day his mother, Martha, who comes to church and sits beside me now all the time, she and another lady called me downstairs in the basement of the church. It was a Sunday school class that she was a Sunday school teacher. And she told me in all seriousness that she had had a dream about me running off with her husband. And I just looked at her and I said, well, Martha, it's not your husband I want, it's your son. And that didn't go over real well. But Patrick and I did start to actually date at that point. And nobody in the church was for us because there was an age difference. And especially his mom And I can understand that because I would, as a mother, understand that an age difference is not something, and they all had their misgivings. But we ended up getting married, and we just had our 31st anniversary a couple weeks ago.
Oh my goodness.
That's awesome.
And we've been so happy, and it's been so blessed. But the church that we were going to all that time, now my baby Angelina at that time was about 6 years old, and Pat and I had gotten so involved. We were youth leaders at one time. We really, were part of this church. And when Angelina was 6 years old, there was a pedophile that went to the church. He was a sister of somebody, or the brother of somebody else that sang at the church sometimes. And he approached Angelina and was going to take her out back. And my husband got very upset and, of course, protected her. Well, some of the people in the church did not side with us on that, which we thought was ridiculous. And this guy turned out to actually be convicted of molesting his 18-month-old daughter and go to jail. So we weren't wrong. But I guess there was a guy that worked in the church office who had been falsely accused at some point in his life, so he was siding with this other guy. And a lot of the people kind of went with that. So we drifted away from the church. We tried to come back a couple times, but it never felt right. And we tried a couple other churches over, like 5-10 years span. We went to First Christian Church. We went to, just several different ones, and we didn't feel at home. And now my husband has a brother who's 9 years younger than him, and he has a lot of issues with depression and so forth. And one night, my husband got a call that my brother was suicidal, and him and his mom, Martha, went to the brother, and he was like punching himself so hard in the face that he got black eyes, and they saw demonic, the eyes, the voice, and that is such a big thing in what happens after this. And I'll tell you why, because something that the demon said to my husband, I didn't find out about until, about 5 months ago. Linda was with me when I found out about it, because we were in the car on evangelism, and I started to tell her about the story with James and his mom. And Pat told me, yeah, I just remember the demon saying, drink, drink, drink. And I never knew that. And it wasn't too long after that happened that we were in a Longhorn Steakhouse, and Pat looked at me and he said, because I had 17 years sober by then, he said, I really wish I could just have a beer like regular people. Watch a ball game, have a beer. And in my little possessive mind, I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to be one of those wives that has a husband that goes out and drinks without him, and I'm sure not going to, sit back and, I didn't at that point feel like I was an alcoholic anyway, because it was 17 years. So we ordered a beer for each of us. Boy, were we off to the races after that. We started to hang out at Hog Heaven on Cleveland Avenue every night almost, and we would drink like beer after beer. We had our own mugs with our names on them, and and then we started to branch out to different places. We used to go up to Rockin' on the River, and we would drive my daughter and her friends when we were stone cold drunk, and she never lets me forget that ever. But at some point we did keep it more to home, but that was after we had been part of the motorcycle club, the Saw Boys. I don't know if you ever heard about it, because Pat rides a Harley. And the Saw Boys, and I will say their actual name is Smart Ass White Boys, and they're a tough group. They're like the Hells Angels, but if you ever heard of the One Percenters, they're the like other ones. And we went on all these rides with them, and we did all these things, and it was not pretty. But one night I got so drunk down at their club on Trump Road that I attempted to walk home all the way to my house near Market from Trump Road. And I got in a neighborhood which there was a lot of people that probably could have done me a lot of harm. And somebody very graciously gave me a ride home, but I couldn't even stand up once I got there. And somebody drove Pat's bike home and drove him home in a car. And we were both that bad. And it was at that point we decided we were going to drink at home only and not drive anymore, because neither one of us had ever gotten a DUI. And, you know, knock on wood, right? So we started to drink at home, and it got to the point where we drank to the point of blackout every night, every single night. And that went on, the drinking from start to finish, for 20 years. And I never felt like I wasn't saved. I never felt like I forgot Jesus, but actually, you know, I wasn't giving him any part of me, and neither was Pat at that point. One night, we were so drunk, and luckily Angelina was still living at the house, that I stumbled into the bathroom, fell headfirst into our tub, and it's like a lower tub with jets, so I was top heavy with my butt up in the air, and I started to scream because I couldn't get myself righted out of the tub. And he went and got his gun. He was going to shoot the doorknob off like they do in the movies. And if he had done that, our bathroom's only like from here to there, and I was with my butt